George's nomination came before us. We reviewed it thoroughly and we concurred. Why did you fire General George?
Some numbers in Washington remain abstract, but some change the atmosphere of a room instantly. On May 14th, 2026, in the Senate Armed Services Committee, when Senator Jack Reed took the podium, he had a single statistic in hand. 60% of the approximately 24 officers Hegseth fired were women or black. This was not a claim produced by the opposition party. This is a ratio based on actual appointments, known names of officers, and documented decisions. And what did Hegseth say in response to that number? Every termination is performance-based. Previous Pentagon leaders were preoccupied with social engineering. To understand what this response is trying to cover up, we need to go back a bit. Because this hearing was not just a human resources discussion. In the midst of a war, it was the question of why combat officers were being dismissed. Background: how Hegseth's officer purge began. Hegseth sent a clear message from the day he started at the Department of Defense in January 2025. The Pentagon's warrior culture will return. DEI programs will be eliminated. Merit will prevail. This discourse is a framework that can be supported by many people at a theoretical level. But how it was implemented in practice painted a very different picture. Reed documented from the Senate floor. In Hegseth's first 100 days, the Pentagon was marked by a period of sweeping ideological purges, scandals, and the unjust dismissal of senior military leaders. These officers were dismissed without anyone being named to replace them, and it created a vacuum that effectively paralyzed military effectiveness during wartime. Reed summarized the most dangerous aspect of this purge. These officers were dismissed without any justification. This is the worst possible outcome for military forces. Fear spreads among senior officers about not raising their voices, not disobeying illegal orders, not reporting harassment, and not questioning decisions. To understand the weight of this sentence, one must see how the military chain of command works, because the fundamental duty of officers is to provide honest and impartial military assessments to their superiors. A general should be able to say, "This plan won't work," even in the face of political pressure. But if they think they will be dismissed for saying so, they prefer to remain silent. And an army where generals remain silent becomes more of an approval mechanism than a true chain of command. Intervention in the assignment list. The president doesn't want to stand next to a black officer. To understand the trial, one must know what happened before Reed presented the statistic in May 2026. The New York Times reported that Hegseth pressured Army Secretary Dan Driscoll for months, but Driscoll repeatedly refused to remove the names of officers with decades of superior records from the list. Ultimately, Hegseth personally removed the names of 4 officers from the list. 2 of the 4 officers were black, 2 were women. The issue of Major General Antoinette Gantt's assignment to command the Washington Military District also came up. Hegseth's deputy, Ricky Burria, told Driscoll that Trump would not want to stand next to a black female officer at military ceremonies. 3 current and former officials who recounted the matter said Driscoll pushed back, saying the president is not racist or sexist. That one sentence undermined the entire merit argument. A merit-based system does not take into account who a soldier stands next to at a ceremony. Combat record, field experience, and professional achievement should be the only variables in this equation. But a different variable came into play here. Reid stated in a statement regarding this development, "If these reports are true, Secretary Hegseth's decision to remove 4 decorated officers from the promotion list who were selected by their peers based on merit is not only disgraceful, but also illegal. Denying individual officers promotions based on their race or gender betrays every principle of merit-based service that military officers have embraced throughout their careers. Refusing to promote individual officers based on their race or gender betrays every principle of merit-based service that military officers have embraced throughout their careers."
Hearing Reid's 60% figure. With all this background, we come to the hearing on May 14th, 2026. This was the second day of the marathon where Hegseth testified in Congress for 2 consecutive days. Reid harshly criticized Hegseth for firing senior military leaders and pointed out the Defense Secretary's failure to recognize the achievements of women and people of color in the military. Reid noted that 60% of the roughly 24 officers Hegseth had fired were women or black. Let's take that number out of context for a second. Hegseth has repeatedly claimed that he makes decisions based on merit, but the statistics say this: nearly 2/3 of the officers who were removed come from 2 categories: women and black officers. This is not a random distribution. If it were a random distribution, this figure would be close to the proportion of women and minority officers in the military. 60% is well above that threshold. Hegseth's response was, "Every firing is based on performance. Previous Pentagon leaders were engaged in social engineering on race and gender in ways we think are unhealthy for the department." The term social engineering has become central to Pete Hegseth's defenses over the past 2 years, but it provides a rather abstract answer to a concrete question. What Jack Reid was asking was why these officers were dismissed, and Hegseth's answer was that previous leadership had done things wrong, which is akin to answering the question, "Who destroyed the bridge?" with, "Why does the river flow?" They're trying to accuse you. Hegseth's religious shield. At this point, Reid also brought up Hegseth's intense interest in Christianity and nationalism. Hegseth responded, "Our department supports a number of faiths. I don't know what you're trying to suggest. I have heard of character assassination attempts by people like you, and I will not bow to it." Character assassination. This line of defense was an attempt to turn the 60% figure into a personal attack. But Reid wasn't presenting the statistics to make Hegseth look like a bad person. She had presented them to document a pattern. When you ask a defense secretary, "Why are 60% of the officers you have dismissed women or black?" the expected response is to prove that the statistic is incorrect or to present the individual performance justifications for each. The answer, "You're trying to smear me," doesn't answer the question. He is avoiding the question. Purge during wartime? A strategic catastrophe? The real weight of this personnel debate comes from the fact that it is happening in the midst of the Iran war. Reid told Hegseth at the hearing, "What concerns you is that you are not telling the president what he needs to hear. You are telling him what he wants to hear." Reid argued that the war left America in a worse strategic position. 13 American soldiers were killed, more than 400 were wounded, and equipment was destroyed. The Strait of Hormuz is closed, and fuel prices have skyrocketed. Iran still possesses enriched uranium and maintains sufficient combat capacity for the conflict to continue in a stalemated state. In this context, the dismissal of experienced commanders means not only a personnel change, but also a weakening of institutional capacity, because an organization must maintain its core management skills even during the most challenging transformation periods. Critical areas such as combat logistics, field coordination, and intelligence assessment rely on years of institutional memory, and pushing out those who carry this memory under the pretext of social engineering creates a significant gap. Reid had previously raised this point on the Senate floor. The removal of officers without justification effectively paralyzes the Army's effectiveness during wartime. These firings were done without any plan for a replacement. Let's adapt this to a company. The company is going through a tough period, losing market share. In this environment, the board of directors is laying off 2/3 of the most experienced department heads. The reason? The previous leadership had created the wrong culture, and no one is being appointed to replace him. Which investor would hold shares in this company?
General cuts. 20% reduction decision. The statistic Reed brought up in the hearing was part of a larger structural decision. Hegseth ordered that the number of 4-star generals and admirals be reduced by at least 20%. The memo also called for a 20% reduction in the number of generals in the National Guard and a 10% reduction in the number of generals and flag officers across the Army. There are currently about 900 generals and flag officers in the military. KCLU Reed also objected to this decision. I have always advocated for efficiency in the Department of Defense, but tough personnel decisions should be based on facts and analysis, not arbitrary percentages. Arbitrary percentages. These two words summarize the essence of Hegseth's approach. A fixed percentage target is not a merit-based evaluation. This means this many generals is too much. Let's cut them. Who will be cut is another question, and the answer to that question lies in the 60% figure presented by Reed, Hegseth's warrior culture, and the real picture. The framework behind all of Hegseth's decisions is to bring back the warrior culture. To understand the logic behind this narrative, one must ask, the world's most powerful army, the United States, was composed of officers with decades of combat experience who had served in wars like Iraq and Afghanistan, and these officers rose to their positions not because of DEI programs, but because they survived and succeeded in the field. Hegseth had previously pledged to remove female officers from combat at the Pentagon and said, so be it, even though the decision would leave some women out. He also reappointed Admiral Yvette Davids, the first woman to lead the Naval Academy, and removed Stacy Chatfield from her NATO assignment. The common point among these names was that they were professional soldiers with decades of combat and command experience, and the systematic removal of these personnel was cited as one of the main reasons for the emerging 60% statistic. What Jack Reed did during the hearing was actually to make this pattern visible with concrete numbers, and Hegseth's response to that number was not a concrete defense, but a general repetition of talking points. Conclusion: merit or selective purge. The picture that emerges from this trial is based on a dual paradox. Hegseth came to office by saying merit, but in a merit-based system, there cannot be officers removed from the promotion list because of their race and gender. In a merit-based system, an appointment is not blocked on the grounds that the president does not want to stand by this officer. In a merit-based system, 60% of those who are fired do not come from two demographic categories. Reed sent this message to Hegseth during the hearing. What concerns you is that you are not telling the president what he needs to hear, but what he wants to hear. This sentence escalated the personnel dispute to a much larger scale. During a time of war, the job of the Secretary of Defense is not to produce politically palatable messages, but to convey the military reality as it is. Reed's concern was this: if Hegseth is purging officers based on political pressure, he could distort military reality under the same pressure. And this concern points to a much larger question than the 60% figure. Is America fighting based on military advice filtered through a political lens? If you want to follow the answers to these questions, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next analysis.